Officially, good morning, everyone. I hope you all continue to grab breakfast, or the very least, a coffee. Because as we all know, food is what fuels our day. So, for now, I'm Robin Mijares. I am your moderator for today's session. Thanking you all today for joining us for the second day of this Philanthropy Asia Summit 2025. In a session where we will talk about food, but not just what's on our plates, but the systems, the people, and the actions we take. From climate threats to local innovations, from farmers to financing. Our goal this morning is to stir up both our appetite and our hunger for action. Now more than ever, Asia's agri-food systems face interconnected threats through rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, and extreme weather events that harm crops, livestock production, fisheries, and many more. These conditions affect millions of smallholder farmers who are essential to the region's food supply and in most cases are the backbones of our nation. Leading the impacts to livelihoods, health, and entire economies, we begin to see how deeply these issues shape our world. They affect what we eat, who grows it, how it is distributed, and whether or not it even makes it to our plate at all. So kindly take this morning as an invitation to not just listen, but engage. We will hear from people who are designing scalable innovations, bridging financing gaps, and proving that community-based solutions do work. You'll learn about approaches that are rooted in science, but also in equity. And you'll see how philanthropy can play a key role in shaping food systems that don't just respond to crises, but actually prevent them by building resilience from the ground up. So to officially set the stage and walk us through the heart of today's session, we begin with a remarkable woman whose work involves shaping impact investment strategies across Asia. Sharon Ko serves as the director of the Center for Impact Investing and Practices, a nonprofit established by Temasek Trust with the mission to foster impact investing and practices in Asia and beyond. Kindly join me in welcoming Director Sharon Ko to the stage.
Thanks so much, Robin, for that very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I don't know about you, but coming off a whole day of discussions yesterday, I am energized. I am excited. There's so much interest in the agri-food space that we're seeing. It was covered in the plenary, covered in a lot of the meetings. So very, very excited to be here. If I could just advance my, here we go. Just to tell you a little bit more about myself, so I'm Sharon Ko. I come from the Center of Impact Investing and Practices. We're a group that are interested in trying to drive more capital towards impact in Asia and beyond. We do a couple of things. One is we build knowledge assets of interest for today's discussion. We've recently put out a paper looking at the climate space, smallholder farmers, how they're being impacted, what are the opportunities, what are the problems. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we learned. We put this report together from speaking with impact investors, philanthropic organizations, solution providers, NGOs working in the space. The other thing we do is we strengthen capabilities, catalyze action. Towards that, we work with a lot of different partners, among which are GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, as well as Tideline. One of our key programs is the Amplifier program, and we have a booth actually, so I encourage anyone who's interested to come meet with us, speak with us. The Amplifier program is a 12-month program where we incubate companies to get them ready for the longer investment pipeline. We have some agri-food companies as well, Mayani. Please come and meet our graduating Amplifier batch at our booth. So that brings us to today's discussion, right? Yesterday, President Taman, when he was in the plenary, I think he framed this really well, so I will borrow from him. He talked about how our current food system is broken. It's not going to be able to sustain us, projected into the future. A green revolution is what he called for. And he framed it around a demand and supply framework, right? So on the demand side, we have more affluent households, increase for food demand. We also have the number of food insecure people skyrocketing, right? So crazy pressures on the food system to supply more. On the supply side of the house, essentially in our region, it's the backbone of our food supply is on 100 million smallholder farmers. These smallholder farmers are working with outdated practices. Many of them are working with degraded lands. This is something President Taman talked about yesterday as well. So even continuing in the same practices that have served them well for decades, as the land degrades, yields are coming down. So that these are the supply pressures that we need to be thinking about. We have a diagram up here where at the top you'll see, what Robin was talking about: erratic temperatures, erratic rainfall, all the extreme climate events. People at the front lines of this are our smallholder farmers whose yields are being impacted. We put this into a perpetuating sort of vicious cycle diagram here to highlight that there are a lot of farmers who are ready to change, who want to change, but they're lacking access to traditional financing. Working off US $2 a day, it's very hard to afford to do some of the necessary things to help them transition, help them move beyond this cycle. So I think one of the calls we have as a group here together and beyond is to try and figure out how do we help to break this cycle. We put up here another lens with which we analyze this problem, which is from a carbon emissions lens, right? So 1/3 of the carbon emissions is coming from the food sector, yet capital, right, financing is not flowing proportionately into the sector. So how can we think about using data like this to drive capital to where it will have the most impact? At the center, we worked with the UNDP Private Finance for the SDGs group, and we went country by country in the region to try and understand what the investment opportunities are that contribute to the SDGs. Towards this, right, looking across all those maps, across all the countries that we looked at, we're actually seeing that over 50% of the investment opportunities are in the climate space, and of which more than 1/3 are actually in the F&B sector. So there are good opportunities out there, but some of them not yet quite ripe for commercial investment, and I think that's where philanthropic capital can come to the table to help catalyze, to help push some of these great ideas, these great pilots into that commercial space and let private capital, let the market take over. One of the key insights that came out of our report is that it's not a one solution, right? There's no silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. Really what we're going to need is a mosaic of solutions and ideas coming together. And speaking with the different people that we had who have been working in this field for decades, we distilled out 4 success factors, if you like, four ingredients for putting something together on the ground that would work. Right? The first is around really building trust with stakeholders, really being hyper-local, right? Understanding what the real needs are and designing solutions that make sense. Often, a solution that might make sense in one country or even one part of a country might not work in another part. So really getting on the ground, speaking to the people who are taking the most risks, actually, when it comes to this transition, building trust and tailoring your solutions. The second factor was around using technology in a smart way to help scale, right? So the term that kept coming up was phygital, right? A mix between being physical and being digital, right? So phygital models, the power of technology really to help us scale some of these great ideas. The third is around really involving the market, right? So ensuring offtake. A lot of good ideas and a lot of pilots. If you don't bring the market to the table, right, how are you going to sustain this? How is philanthropic capital going to exit and commercial capital, private capital going to be able to take over? So involving the market early on. The final success factor was really around building capacity. There is a fair amount of capacity building that needs to happen for farmers, for regulators, for intermediaries, for everyone along the whole ecosystem trying to support this change. So we have a QR code up here. If anyone's interested in the report, I encourage you to just scan it. We have some physical copies in the room as well if you like. But I guess I will end with this thought, right? That I think, smallholder farmers, they're small in scale, but they're mighty in potential, right? They're at the front lines and they're ready for the change, but what they need is support from us. Support in the form of financing, support in the form of technology, support in the form of partnerships coming together to cooperate, to bring about the change that we need. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Next, we have someone who has spent decades at the front lines of sustainable agriculture and biodiversity, not just in theory, but in the field. Dr. Stefan Weise is the Managing Director of Asia at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. Let's give a big round of applause to Dr. Stefan Weise.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, we sort of have been working for, I think it's there. We have been working as the Alliance of Bioversity and CIAT for 5 decades and more in trying to develop and working on developing solutions that Sharon talked about for smallholder farmers globally. So that's our task. And so the linking in with groups that are sitting around the table here is critical for us to be able to get these solutions to work, to deploy these solutions. And of course, if you look at particularly the situation we face nowadays with the different crises that we have in terms of climate change, biodiversity loss, malnutrition, environmental degradation, and the data that you were also showing, Sharon, it's complex, but at the same time, it's interconnected. So the key issue is that we need to work at the nexus, what we call the nexus, at the intersection of these different challenges. It's not just solutions on climate, it's not just solutions on nutrition, but how can we address the environment while we also are addressing the climate change aspects we have, the malnutrition we face. So it's finding these nexus solutions which is critical going forward. And that is different from what we were doing maybe just 20 years ago. And so there's been a shift in also our thinking in addressing the realities that smallholder farmers face. So our mission, let me just jump to the mission, is basically to find these research-based solutions that harness agricultural biodiversity and with which we can also then transform the food systems to improve people's lives in a climate crisis. And these solutions mean that we have to work on multiple angles. This includes angles related to consumption, food systems, agrobiodiversity, crops, gender and inclusion, multifunctional landscapes, climate, digital inclusion, and then, of course, monitoring and impact, which are very critical to make sure that the interventions we have are actually making a difference at the end of the day. So it has to be multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and cutting across these different areas of constraints that I identified in the earlier slide. And we have a global reach. We work in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, around 2,000 staff, or 1,800 staff, close to a third to a half of them being directly related to research and research support. And in Asia particularly, we all are really looking at bringing together this entire agricultural journey, as we say, from soil to plate, by considering these different interactions. And so I will go through a few examples of the types of work we do. It's not exhaustive, nor do I want to go into the details, but just to give you a flavor. So don't try reading the slides. I'll be moving too fast. But it's an opportunity for us then to interact afterwards and to touch base on some of these opportunities or identify others that we might be working on. And I assume the advantage we have is that we can bring global experiences to the region, but also, like we heard yesterday, take experiences from the region back into the global setting. So one area is on the use of biodiversity for food and nutrition, and this is really using underutilized climate-smart, nutritious foods, and what that is all about. Danny Hunter will be on the panel, and he'll be talking about that, so I'm not going to go into any details there. Another area that we have been engaged in, much more recent actually, is around the whole issue of sustainable financing, and what are some of the investment vehicles we should be developing that really can reach the smallholder farmers, the SMEs, etc., in today's situation. And I won't go into that either because we have Dharani, who will be on the panel. There he is. He'll be on the panel as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Then we have some of the solutions like My Farm Trees is how do we get trees onto smallholder farms based on what the farmers need and based on giving the best material, planting material that's available, and where do we source this from and how do we monitor this. So there's a whole framing of that, and we have an innovation stand on one floor up on the 4th floor if you haven't seen it in the open area there. Oh, now it's here. Okay, it's been moved, sorry. I'm confused. Okay. Then another area that we've been initiating more recently as well is really looking at the materials that are out there that could be reducing the methane emissions of livestock. And so really identifying the forages and feed that could be reducing that, testing it with the animals, but then also looking at how do you get the seed out to the farmers who have the livestock. So there's a whole framing around that as well. And then we've been working also at the national level, like in Vietnam in terms of food systems transformation. Vietnam developed the strategy for this sustainable transformation of their food system that cuts across agriculture, environment, the health sector, and we've been supporting them with technical advice amongst other groups as well, working on developing national action plans, so really also a top-down policy-related engagement to make the changes happen on the ground. And finally, another example is in Vietnam, but we have done this in Cambodia as well as Laos, is empowering farmers to optimize their farming practices, by giving them up-to-date climate information so that they can make their decisions on and supporting those decisions in terms of how best do they address the variability that farmers face nowadays around the climate. So with that, that was just a flavor of things, and happy to engage. And really, it's about linking up and making these things work. So, Robin, I think that was my last slide.
Perfect. Okay. Mic check. There you go. Kindly give a big round of applause to Dr. Stefan. So, thank you so much, Sharon and Stefan. Wow, what a powerful way to start the morning. And the best part, we're only getting started. Up next, we'll hear from a panel of experts who will guide us through these important conversations, drawing from their diverse perspective and years of experience. May I now call each of you to kindly join me up on stage, the floor. First, we have Dr. Danny Hunter, Principal Scientist in the Food, Environment, and Consumer Behavior Group at the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. Kindly all give a big round of applause. Following him, we have Sir Bernard Tan, Chairman of the Golden Philanthropies. Dr. Dharani Darbura, Data Products and Solution Lead at the CGIAR Hub for Sustainable Finance. And last but most definitely not the least, Dr. Naweed Navi, Senior Investigator at the Temasek Life Science Laboratory. All right. So now you'll hear how each of them are shaping the future of food in their own unique way. As you listen, we invite you to think about your own journeys, whether in policy, philanthropy, research, science, or even finance. Your perspective matters to us. So good morning, panelists. Thank you so much for joining us today. So you all have come from very different backgrounds, different professions, specialties, but you all have one clear goal in mind, and that's improving our food systems. So with that, I'm gonna jump straight out, and I'm gonna, of course, start with Sir Danny Hunter. So, Dr. Danny, there are many proposed innovations and initiatives for sustainable agriculture, but it can be hard to discern what is effective and what is not. What do you think are the characteristics of solutions that can take root and make sustainable impact on farming communities and food security in Asia? Doctor?
Robin, do I have to sit?
You could do whatever. You
I
can
just
break
can't see
down
the
here
slides.
if you want, sir.
And good morning, everyone. I'm not used to speaking this early in the morning in public. So yeah, I think Sharon mentioned a lot of the characteristics of what makes an effective solution. But I want to focus very much on a problem and a solution to that problem that was highlighted yesterday. I don't know whether anybody in the room attended the nutrition challenge, and Professor Wisawat from Mahidol University highlighted one of the key problems that we're facing is that we are rapidly losing a lot of our biodiversity, especially food biodiversity in our food system. And that's contributing to simplified agricultural production, but also the simplification of diets, and to an extent, a large degree of vulnerability in our food system. So our food biodiversity is disappearing fast, and just highlighted on the slide, out of the 6,000 to 7,000 food crops that have been used throughout humanity's history, we now rely on about 200 within our food systems. And only 9 plants account for 70% of our food production. And really, we rely on 3 staple crops, rice, wheat, and maize, for the bulk of our plant-related calories. And why is this important? Because that means we're also losing a lot of potential solutions and options, not only for climate resilience, because many of these food crops that we're losing, the underutilized species that Stefan referred to, are climate resilient, they're nutrient rich, but probably most importantly, they're locally and culturally important. So within the Alliance, we've developed this approach called the Bioversity for Food and Nutrition Initiative, where we work with countries, especially in mega biodiverse countries, to co-design and co-develop and co-implement what we think are solutions and sustainable interventions to address this problem of losing our food biodiversity. And that uses a 3-pronged approach, trying to develop more data and evidence for the value of those underutilized species, then using that data and evidence to target public policies like school meals and public food procurement, but also other interventions that'll create demand for this food, supermarkets and fresh markets and that as well. And a large focus on creating public awareness and more understanding of the value of these foods. So I'm just highlighting one of the examples that we work with in Brazil, a huge mega biodiverse country. It's got 6 biomes, so we worked with federal universities in each of those biomes to map the underutilized food biodiversity that was available, worked with postgraduate students and researchers to look at the nutritional value, and this is just some examples of that biodiversity. But the most important element of this slide is on the right-hand side, showing the superior nutritional value in terms of vitamin A and vitamin C of these indigenous native species in green, compared to the pale exotic species that are more commonly found in school meals, in markets, supermarkets, and elsewhere. And this is something that you'll find invariably. The first slide I had in Climate Smart Foods was native underutilized fruits in the Philippines. And you'll find similar results in terms of the nutritional quality when you compare it to the more commonly available exotic foods that are available in these countries. So just highlighting some of the outputs that we achieved in Brazil, and this was over a 12-year period, and this is ongoing. We generated nutrition data on 200 native nutrient-rich foods from right across the 6 biomes in Brazil. We worked with a large network of researchers at universities, other institutes like Embrapa and the Amazonian Research Institute to undertake that kind of nutritional analysis. And then using that data, information and knowledge, working with ministries, Ministry of Social Development, Ministry of Environment, to develop the very first public policy anywhere in the world that formally recognizes these underutilized foods. And why is that important? Because that brings formal recognition to these foods, makes it easier for family farmers, smallholders to gain access to the national public procurement program in Brazil and the national school feeding program in Brazil. And the beauty of Brazil is it's got some very nice incentives that create demand for this kind of food. They've got the famous 30% rule, which stipulates that 30% of the production for local school meals has to come from family farmers who are producing these kinds of foods. So yeah, we worked a lot around school meals, public food procurement, and leveraging those public mechanisms. We also worked with chefs at the regional, national, right down to the local level in terms of how do you make the appearance of a lot of these foods much more amenable to kids in terms of adding a modern slant to recipes. And as a result of that, we developed the very first national biodiversity recipe book in Brazil. And this again is the only national book of this nature that I'm aware of. And you can see 3 books. We actually developed 5 around mapping and prioritizing all of the biodiversity in the 6 biomes. I just finished with one example from the Philippines. This is an example where we embedded these kinds of foods into integrated school nutrition model, just getting them into school gardens and linking that to nutrition education and supplementary school feeding. And that program started in 2012. It's gone through a range of iterations, and it now is a global, a national program in the Philippines, operating through what we call lighthouse schools, which are like aspirational schools, like the president yesterday was talking about aspirational districts. These are schools that act as hubs for surrounding schools, and they contain these very biodiverse school gardens, crop museums, that are linking to nutrition education, also linking to supplementing school meals. And those lighthouse schools are now influencing about 40,000 public schools in the Philippines.
Oh my God, I think that's the powerful end to that, for sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Danny. And talking about climate smart nutrition is so important nowadays as well. As we all know, climate change is a happening thing, and it really does affect agriculture in many ways. Now, I'd like to jump onto your neighbor.
Who?
Sir Bernard Tan from Golden Philanthropies. Every philanthropy has its own unique focus and aspiration for impact. What do you think is the special role that philanthropy plays in the context of agriculture?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And like Danny, I won't stand up because I don't have many slides. Thank you for the invitation, the organizers. And so by way of introduction, I'm Bernard Tan. I am the chairman of Golden Philanthropies. And Golden Philanthropies is actually a new philanthropy that was set up as part of PAA in order to push climate change. One of our goals, obviously, is to get us to net zero. And as we understand, agricultural systems are obviously a contributory factor to the carbon equation, both in terms of land use, because obviously if we are going to use more and more land of agriculture, we deny it from being carbon sinks. And also in the production of agricultural products, there's a lot of carbon emissions involved. We are also largely focused on Indonesia, and I hope during this session I will just do a bit of storytelling about my experience in Indonesia. But obviously Indonesia as a focus is good because there's a huge amount that can be done in that vast archipelagic country. Now, I'm not an Indonesian, but I first stepped foot in Indonesia in 1998. And over the last 27 years, I have lived, worked, traveled extensively in Indonesia. I feel partly Indonesian. I've grown to love the people and the country in total. And obviously, because I have done that, I think I'm entitled to also have very strong views of things that happen in Indonesia. And even though I think there are some Indonesian colleagues here that may disagree with me, I actually say these things because I actually feel Indonesian. There are many challenges in Indonesia, but one of the key challenges is in its food system, in agricultural systems. Apart from palm oil, which obviously now are world beaters in terms of yield and productivity, every other agricultural crop in Indonesia struggles. This is obviously a cause for concern. So let me just take one example, rice. Right? So very few people actually realize that Indonesia is one of the world's largest importer of rice. If you travel anywhere in Indonesia, you will see a rice field, right? And it boggles the mind how a country so vast and so invested in rice still needs to import so much rice. And one of the reasons is because it's really very low in yield. I remember being in Kalimantan, and this is not in the city, it's really quite far out, right? And I met a farmer, asked about the yield that he had in his hectare of a rice field, and it was 1 ton per hectare. And that boggles my mind because the best in class in Southeast Asia is about 8 to 12 tons. So to produce 1 ton, really, you're really underproducing. So I've chosen rice, but I could say the same thing about groundnuts. I was in Lombok one time. Guy grew peanuts in the ground, right? Asked how much he got for 1 hectare, 1 ton. In Australia, you could probably get 5. So really productivity in agriculture in Indonesia is extremely low. So what are the reasons? Well, one of the reasons is cultural. I remember speaking to this subsistence farmer, right? And he goes and says, don't you want to have more than 1 ton of rice? And he goes, Pa, it's enough for my family. I've had enough. I don't know what to do if I produce more than 1 ton of rice. Right? And so the idea of growing for your own personal consumption for your family is quite deeply rooted in many parts of rural Indonesia. So when someone comes and they says, well, I have a better method, I've got new technology, I have better seeds, they go, what for? Right? And they in fact actually get very distrustful. Moreover, more and more people are now, and the pressure increases, right? Because if I only grow for my own family, who grows for the rest? Because more and more people are migrating to cities. When I first went to Indonesia in 1998, about 40% of the workforce was employed in agriculture. Today, 27 years on, it's probably dropped to about 28%. So if less people are producing food, that puts even more pressure on getting yields up and agricultural systems moving. So that's one big problem. The other problem is farm sizes. Farm sizes in Indonesia are extremely small, right? The FAO puts it about 0.6 hectares per farm, right? The average in Thailand is probably 4 hectares, which is still small when you compare to mega farms in Australia or the cornfields in Iowa that runs for hectares and hectares. And when you have small sizes, you are denied any form of economies of scale. You don't have the infrastructure, you don't use the technology, you don't use the machinery, modern farming methods are left away. All these things are denied to smallholders. I've actually thought about the question why this is. Well, partly it's cultural again. People look after their own food needs But it's also partly to do with the transmigration program that was instituted in the 70s. So when Suharto wanted to encourage people to move away from Java, right, and basically farm Kalimantan, Sumatra, the gift was 2 hectares of land. That was the incentive. So if you have multiples of 2 hectares of land, which is really quite small, right, then your farming system is actually based on the fact that you have 2 hectares of land. So unless you have larger farms, or at least some cooperation within the farms, you are really denied the productivity benefits that come from it. Now, obviously, climate change imposes yet another layer, right? And then, you have issues of, irrigation and so on and so forth. So that's, again, another challenge. The last challenge I put out is the supply chain. If you go to any part in Indonesia, the logistics system does not usually include a cold chain, right? And this means that when I'm moving, let's say, vegetables, I only have a 6-hour window to actually get it to market. And this results in huge amount of food spoilage. The waste can actually be quite high, depending on where you are. But the estimates that right now is that, a large proportion of food that's produced in Indonesia is actually wasted. The estimates some people put is 3 to 5% of GDP, which is huge, right? And if we are going to save the planet, increase, feed more people, we've got to find a way in which to solve this problem. Also, because there are many smallholders, a lot of aggregators exist. When you have small farms and they don't know how to get the stuff to market, there will be a middleman, right? And we all know this problem of middlemen in many, many systems. They cream off the majority of the profits. So you don't get the incentives to grow, right, at the bottom. You get the incentive to be a middleman, right? And again, that poses a problem. So basically, the challenges are huge. Now, obviously, as a philanthropy, I've identified all these problems. These are personal stories, by the way, right? There's so much opportunity for us to fix the systems. At Golden Philanthropies, we are not in the business of handouts. We're in the business of seeding catalytic solutions that will have the legs to run to solve any part of these problems. But obviously, the opportunities are great, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you for sharing the different challenges and using your work in Indonesia as an example as well. Next one we have, of course. Our next one is actually for Dr. Naweed first. Yeah, so Dr. Naweed, you will be our first. And so just double checking. All right. Oh. So, Dr. Vura, we always talk about your impact through your organization, but we want to ask, how does Impact SF define innovative financing models for sustainable agriculture? And what features of innovative financing models should we be most excited about?
Yeah, firstly, thank you very much. Thank you for showing up such early during the day. Terima kasih for your inspiring stories. Thank you, Danny. So I'm part of the CJR Hub for Sustainable Finance, and our role and our mission in the unit is to actually mobilize commercial and philanthropic capital so that financial institutions, especially commercial capital, can invest into some of the challenges that Sharon raised and you also raised, and of course what Danny also raised. So that's the role of Impact SF. Just trying to go to the next slide. Okay, can I stand in?
Yes, of course.
That's okay? Yes, it's difficult to see the screen. But what I wanted to say was I want to put the problem straight up, right? And everybody has put their problems up. I put some numbers to these problems just to make it a bit more appealing, I guess, unfortunately, is that overall there's about close to 100,000 ag SMEs in Southeast Asia, right? And these ag SMEs are small cooperatives, small farmers who are grouping together. That's how I consider as ag SMEs. And in Southeast Asia, a very recent study from a major organization said actually there's $100 billion USD financing need at this point in time, and it will keep growing as we deny the problem much more. Out of this, 50% financing is unmet, right? Oh, and what is really interesting is, despite this 50% financing need that is driving the problem, a third of them, I mean, these are farmers and these are small cooperatives. They have to make their living anyways, right? So they have found their own ways, together with a lot of local technical assistance providers, to actually become more resilient. And there are these, close to 30% of these farmers are, resilient to climate and weather shocks. But in a sense, they have de-risked their own production. But the problem is, commercial banks, NBFIs, non-banking financial institutions, social lenders, impact funds, they don't still consider this as fully de-risked. And that's where that's the key role of Impact SF, right? How can we mobilize our science and our technologies to mobilize more capital from commercial lenders so that farmers can transition away from all the donor-led funding that has been supporting them for so long? And how do we start with this journey? So in a sense, we work with a lot of in the region with many commercial banks in the ASEAN countries, and we start off with, actually, banks even don't understand what are the risks that are what they see in the next few seasons and how it's going to impact the productivity of the crop. And that's why what they do is they stay away from lending to any of these farmers, right? And if they don't get the money, then how do they take all the solutions that are being proposed? So that is the biggest risk for the bank, right? So we train, and I think Sharon was saying that the last point of training the stakeholders. So we help the financial institutions, and these financial institutions are commercial banks, right? We train them, we show them what's the risk in the next few seasons, how it's going to impact the productivity of that farmer, and where actually to finance, how much, whom, when, and where. That is an insight already to the banks to say, okay, now I see this, I see the risk, I see where it is, where I should put my money, because now it's clear. But then once we identify with the bank together, that is only partial de-risking, because the farmer has reduced their risk by adapting to climate change and climate shocks. But for a financial institution, the risk is even more, because there are many other elements of risk that needs to be covered. And that's where we work together with the banks, and these are like commercial investors, to build new loan products that actually help the farmers to take this new solutions and technologies and scale them. So in a sense, what we have done is through these climate smart loan products, we have been able to mobilize. There is a lot of DFIs, development financial institutions, philanthropies that actually give monies to these banks. So we have been able to help the banks use this money to actually put the money exactly where it is needed. So on an average, about 2 to 4x leverage ratio. I can talk more about this later, but in a sense, just to give examples, there are 2 specific loan products that we are working with that have been lent out already. One specifically looking at farmers in Cambodia, especially in Krache, in the province of Krache. They want to practice diversified systems. And it's good for the market, it's good for them, and it's also good for the financial institution. So that's one specific loan product. In Philippines, in Bukidnon, there's another one on climate-adapted maize, which is sustainably grown. Post-investment, what we have done is for these products, again, using science and technology, we've been able to set up measures that can monitor and help the banks report on the impacts that they are getting because of financing these particular solutions. And what this has done is very interesting, that the banks have been able to raise more concessional capital from philanthropies, from development financial institutions. So they're getting more money because of partnering with us and actually doing the things that we are helping them do it. This approach is actually gaining traction in the region for us. We've been able to mobilize certain capital for a few other institutions in Vietnam. But what is really exciting about, and that was a question that I think, Robin, you asked, is that what excites us as a team is the sustainability of the climate smart finance bundles, these loan products, right? Because here we use, as we all keep saying, we use the science and data that development agencies are actually pushing, but to reduce risk, because that's the key thing, to reduce risk, de-risk, both for the farmer, and for the financial institution, and then generate social and environmental impacts. across the supply chain, both capital and capital supply and demand. Yeah, that was it.
Thank you
Hope I
so
was in time.
much, Dr. Durrani. Very well said. Thank you for sharing the work of Impact SF. Many empowering works as well. Now we're jumping on. So, Dr. Naweed, you've heard all of our speakers talk about climate change and climate smart agriculture. So now my question for you is, it's difficult for many of us to encapsulate the complex relationship of climate change with agriculture. How can many of us think about this topic more intuitively? And how does this guide the work that you do at Temasek Life Science Laboratory?
Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. I would like to break this question down to a more simpler level and answer it in the context of rice production. So foremost, as all of us have seen, highly unpredictable and extremely erratic climate and weather patterns have been impacting food production, including rice production, through heat stress, rise in temperatures, droughts, flooding, and sometimes it's even worse because most of these stresses occur simultaneously within the same growing season. And this impacts food production in the face of an increasing demand for rice, for example. Now, the impact is the maximum on smallholder farmers because it lessens their produce, and at the same time, the income loss is added to that. On the other side of the question, so this is one half of it, rice production itself affects climate change by producing very powerful greenhouse gases, in particular methane. And this adds up to creating more and more of these climate change effects on the rice production itself. Coming back to the second half of your question, so at the Temasek Life Sciences Laboratory, we took a step back and looked at it in a more holistic kind of way. In particular, trying to understand it from the context of what we call as genetics into environment kind of interaction. And we have almost a couple of decades worth of deep knowledge and understanding of rice biology. And we leveraged on that experience to basically come up with a strategy that would integrate these aspects of plant, environment, soil kind of interaction, to come up with a strategy for basically guiding our principle or question that is on the screen. It's a very simple what-if question. What if we could solve both the aspects of this question, like help farmers produce more sustainably, improve the rice yields, and at the same time reduce the impact of rice production on climate change by reducing the methane levels at the same time. Now, the approach that we took is very simply a three-pronged kind of approach. And like I mentioned, it leverages on our deep scientific knowledge of rice biology. So we basically looked for particular traits that were climate smart in terms of allowing rice to grow better under low water stress, under heat, under drought, without affecting the yield per se. So we looked for climate smart seed varieties and traits, and then couple them with a highly integrated approach in terms of reducing or controlling irrigation. The idea was to reduce the water usage by rice, and at the same time, try and see if we could reduce the methane levels, which is normally associated with the anaerobic flooded conditions that rice grows in normally. So this was to shift the cultivation from anaerobic to aerobic kind of, and that allowed us to reduce the methane levels per se. The last part of this three-pronged approach was even more important because that dealt with one of the questions that was raised yesterday as well about soil health. And here we are making amendments that help reduce the methane levels and at the same time improve nutrient quality in the soil so that the plants can grow better under these aerobic kind of environments. Now, thus far, our approach has been fairly successful. So this integrated approach has helped us to reduce methane levels by 30 to 50%. and almost halved the requirement of water and fertilizers under these conditions. More importantly, it has focused primarily on these smallholder farmers and helped us build capacity and capabilities in the region, particularly in 3 geographies: India, Laos, and Indonesia. And this has been extremely helpful in terms of the support from Philanthropy Asia Alliance, the Gates Foundation, and a couple of anonymous donors as well. And more recently, we are deeply honored to be the recipients of the Gaia Award from the World Economic Forum. And this, we think, will help us to take this science-based innovation and approach to scale up the impact within the region with a particular focus on smallholder farmers. And there are plenty of them in this region. There are 150 million smallholder farmers in Asia. So the idea is that to use our science-driven impact to help the farmers grow better with minimizing their impact on climate. And I would end by bringing up these 4 challenges. These are very important going forward, and especially in our scale-up kind of activity. First and foremost is the adoption of these alternate cultivation methods for farmers who are very strictly following their own methodologies. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why the productivity is low in the region. So this would help us to support the farmers in growing better with less. Benchmarking for methane emissions is very important in the region, especially for the MRV protocols, because one of the aspects that we have is to bring the climate benefits back to the smallholder farmers. So this becomes very important going forward. And capacity building, and especially the involvement of philanthropies in particular, would be extremely useful in amplifying this impact, so that we could accelerate these sustainable practices, at least for rice production, in a very integrated and sort of interconnected way, by reducing the climate impact while maintaining or increasing the yields significantly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naweed. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists for this amazing, for all their insights and their time. Can we all just give them a big round of applause for all their time? So don't leave yet. We will now continue to our more exciting part, where this is actually the open panel discussion. So now you guys have them in one room. You can ask anything. Utilize this. But yes, before we start the Q&A, this is also time for reflection and sharing. And I know it's usually hard for the first person to want to do the reflecting. So for now, I will also share a small story just to ease it up on you guys, and then we will transition to the Q&A. Right, so. You have the clicker real quick. Oh, okay, no. All right, so we will transition. Yeah, but you will be the first, don't worry. No one's taking that mic from you, girl. Okay. All right, so yes, just for a short reflection. I didn't know someone would be so excited to answer the question. But yes, so for the presentation, so for a short reflection, despite popular beliefs, I'm not just here for the free breakfast. I'm actually quite aligned with food security and improving food systems as well. But my story is quite unconventional in a way. So as you all remember, way back in 2020, the pandemic struck the Philippines. This caused threats to food security and health challenges, financial burden, and disrupted supply chains, among others. Recent data by the United Nations Food Report at the time showed that the hunger rate was around 44.7%, with the majority of those affected coming from marginalized poor sectors. Now, I was only 19 years old at the time and was in high school. And how I actually came up with the solution for this problem is actually pretty funny. As it just started as a mock paper I had to write for one of my classes. Note, this was no research, it was no thesis. It was just one of those small essay questions with like a 200 max word count, in which the question was, if you were a barangay captain for a day, what would you do to help with the COVID-19 pandemic? And everyone in my class was writing about mass testing and vaccination trials, which are all very good solutions, don't get me wrong. But no one was really talking about the dire urgent problem that we face on a day-to-day, and that was hunger or the need to eat. So just with my 14 out of 20 paper, I decided to still do it. And with just a small class of 40 students, we provided in-depth planting workshops and free vegetable planting kits so that they could become the primary food producers and breadwinners of their households, regardless of their age. But yeah, what started as a small idea on paper has now created impact larger than I could have ever imagined, with us now reaching over 98,000 public school students from all 42 public schools in Las Piñas City. So whoever gave me that 14 out of 20, I want to talk to her after this. But of course, like any great innovative idea, we realized we weren't done yet. Because we don't only want to raise kids that can feed themselves, but we want to raise kids that have the desire to feed others as well. So we realized that teaching in classrooms is not enough. We must also teach them in farmlands. So from what started as this, has now become this. Introducing you all to Grow School, which is a 20-foot tall structure entirely made of sustainable bamboo and actually runs on renewable solar power energy. Here is where we host practical training sessions and introduce the students to amazing local farmers and other successful individuals working under agriculture and sharing their stories, experiences, strong passions for the arts and sciences of cultivating our soils and crops. Here is where also we teach them not only traditional way of farming, but also innovative new ways of growing, such as agri-tech, agripreneurship, climate-smart agriculture is one of them as well, so that they can become the next generation of not just farmers, but agricultural leaders, scientists, policymakers, and change makers. And I want to play a little game, just to lighten up the room, on who can guess what the architecture of the school was actually inspired to look like. Do we have any guesses? I think some people are like feeling it up, but it's Wisha. Oh. Do you have an answer what you think it is?
Flower.
I had that answer before, but close. No. Any more answers? Oh, I see one in the back. Oh, your car is waiting for you at the Sands parking lot. Okay, congratulations. Okay. Sponsored by Temasek Trust. But yes, it's actually inspired as a modern-day interpretation of a bahay kubo in the Philippines, or also to commemorate our Filipino farmers. It's inspired by the Filipino hat, or also known as the salakot in Tagalog. So if we have Filipinos here, they'd know that. Why didn't you answer? But yes, so aside from that, we have kids that we also believe that farming is not just a one-sided thing. It's not just about putting seeds on the ground. It's about planting seeds in the hearts of kids, that you inspire them through holistic learning and giving every child a childhood. So we teach them arts and crafts. We have partners from South Korea teaching master builder class using Lego bricks. With some kids, that's the first time they've seen a Lego brick, so it's very life-changing. And then seeing them want to continue becoming farmers when they grow up, and changing the stigma that farming is only for the poor or it's a dirty profession, as we all know in this room is not true. So yes, for all of this, our mission has just always been for the Filipino youth to never be hungry, but always have the hunger for change. So that's my reflection. It's now you guys' turn to share. Thank you. And I think I'd like to start with the lovely lady that wanted to ask her question. So kindly, for our panelists.
Well, it's both, to your point, both like a reflection and a question that I want to ask. My name is Ayesha, and like many of you guys in this room, I love food, and I think we all, and I also want to make sure that each and every one of us have access to food, and for those farmers and fisher folks who feed us, that they can actually feed their kids, because those are the first ones. Those are really the people who currently are suffering from seasonal hunger year after year. So I do thank you, Robin, for sharing your story and for also solving from the lens of hunger. And what I want a reflection from everything that has been said today, I thank each and every one of you, is that to get to, Dr. Wise, to get to that nexus that you talk about of nutrition, of climate change, of biodiversity loss, we have found that if you first solve it from what the farmer is actually struggling with, what is that pain point, then you actually solve that nexus right away. So, and if you do it in a way where it's a market creation and not a handout, to your point, Bernard, you can actually get that change and that transformation in just 16 weeks. So what we have done in the Philippines at the start of the pandemic was we took a school lunch program that was self-sustaining, paid for by the parents. It was like 5 cents US dollars. It was vegetables and protein sourced from parents' backyards. The school lunch itself was the market for that local, you know, for the parents in the local village. At the pandemic, when schools were closed, we took a market-based food security solution and brought it out to the community. And what we said is, well, if farmers who are struggling with struggling to find that income of $2 or $3 a day to feed their family that day, giving them seeds is not going to do it. You have to create a market. I was an ex-banker. I guess I am an ex-banker. And I have found that farmers, and I'm a farmer myself, to be the most logical people I've ever had to deal with. And that the rural areas is the most efficient capital markets I've ever seen. And I was a banker in New York, and I did leverage finance and acquisition finance. So please, hopefully you can trust that. And if you give them a market, if you say, in 6 weeks, there's going to be a vegetable exchange, and you can get access to over 20 kinds of vegetables that your neighbors are going to plant. And all you need to do is bring 3 kinds of vegetables that you love to eat, right? Trusting them, that you plant organically in your backyard. That's all you need to be part of this vegetable exchange. And from that invitation, that win, that immediate win, that birth ARC's vegetable exchange called Feedback. And from that, farmers developed idle land in their backyards, brought their vegetables to the exchange in 6 weeks. And in a 10 or 12-week period, basically, families were already eating from their own homes. They were producing excess that they were bringing to the exchange and selling to their local markets and nearby villages and towns. Malnutrition is gone, and the entire community is changed. You would hear from Barangay Capitans that petty theft, no one's already stealing like chickens anymore because everyone has food in their backyard. And everyone was composting. All of the plastics were being recycled as containers, and all of the biological waste. And so if we, as a community here, if we look at it as we need to have farmers in this room, we have to look at them as partners, right? So my question is, why is there a farmer on stage, right? If we look at them as partners and if we solve with them, make it a market-based solution that touches on their pain point, we can actually solve that nexus. So now, after they graduate from this 16-week program, they're actually so excited to not just create their own ventures and supply their area and transform the local food system in their area, to actually reforest. They're excited to reforest their communities and the nearby areas. So I wanted to share that as it works. We've done it in 101 communities in less than 3 years. It's a change to a top-down scaling approach. It's a bottoms-up scaling approach that actually gets trust and buy-in from the people and gets investment from the local community and the municipal community. So it's a 50-50 solution. And as a banker, I love ROI. We are getting over 11 times ROI for every investment that we put in. And I just want to share that there is solutions. And we're currently scaling this throughout the Philippines and now sharing it in other parts of the world.
Thank you so much. I think that deserves our own round of applause as well. Very brilliantly said. And we thank you for your work through agriculture as well. For our panelists, do you have any thoughts and reflections, perhaps to her amazing message as well. Anyone, don't fight over it. Okay, so Dr. Dani, go ahead.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, maybe just to respond to that, and also maybe something that Bernard mentioned. No, that's just a beautiful example of a grassroots approach to local communities supplying the school with nutritious food. With so many spillover effects, yeah. When you do that, they can find alternative markets as well because they've got that initial capacity, and then you start to get upstream spillovers in terms of diversification, more trees in farms and so forth. So, no, it's a great example, and there's wonderful things happening in the Philippines. And I think maybe when I go in as an outsider, and I've worked in the Philippines the last 10 years now, finding a way to somehow join up a lot of this work. The lighthouse schools during COVID, they became hubs when schools were closed to supply diversity from those school gardens to local communities. And local communities were coming in and maintaining the gardens and using them. So that speaks beautifully to what the whole school meals space is kind of moving to, homegrown school feeding, where the vast majority of the food that goes into menus is coming from local producers. So that also brings me back then, Bernard, to what you were saying about Indonesia. Indonesia's got huge aspirations around universal free school meals, and in December Indonesia sent a delegation of about 15 people to Brazil to learn about what they were doing through the National School Meals Program in terms of schools as a structured market for local producers, but also, more importantly, how do you introduce incentives into public policies, into school meals to create that demand for local food diversity, local production, locally, culturally appropriate food. So I'm wondering what change that might bring about in terms of the aspirations in Indonesia to have a universal school meals program. Indonesia is another mega biodiverse country like Brazil. There's so much unique, novel, local biodiversity. Even within rice, some of the traditional varieties in terms of their nutritional value is far superior to what you find.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dani. And thank you so much for the insight. I think Dr. Darani also wants to add a few points as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, very short. I'm a farmer as well, but I learned from the farmers on the field. So I mean, so just to say, why is it the farmer setting? But it's because, we are also, I'm a farmer in that sense.
We're just very neatly dressed today.
Farmers are more neatly dressed, by the way. No, but you're right. I'm neatly dressed for the first time. That is true. No, but what I wanted to say was, and you raised a very important point, actually, going back to what Stefan.
I hear you guys that we're all farmers, but how many of us here have really
Experienced hunger, you mean? Okay, I'll come to that. I was just going back to the other point. Yeah. Yes, what I was going to come to was the point you raised about, and that you actually also agreed with what Stefan was saying, is that if you find the problem that the farmer is facing and what is the solution, actually the farmers have their own solutions. They have their solutions, and they have a solution that is in their periphery, right? What they can do, where essentially we come is to then say, okay, you have this problem, you have your own solution to that problem. How do we align your solution to the needs of the value chain so that you are open to the market? And that's how that's how the genesis of these climate smart finance products come in. Then we go back to the financial institutions and we tell them, hey, there is a market and there is a potential here. And so we do market intelligence for them already. But in a sense, you're absolutely right that the starting point is what the farmer has in their periphery. What are the problems? What are the solutions they have? How do you link it to the value chain, to the market, and then bring a case to the banks to say, okay, now you put the money in to scale them out. This was just my 2 cents on that.
I think, sir.
I just want 30 seconds. I just want to respond again. Thank you for your comments. Any philanthropic ideas that we have really needs the participation from bottom up. One of the key things we've learned is you can never force a solution on a farmer. It doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And maybe I'll share this, story that was told to me one time when I was in New York. So there was this Italian philanthropy that went to Africa, and they decided that they wanted to grow tomatoes because it's very important, right, for Italian food. And the farmers there said, no, we don't want to grow tomatoes. And they says, no, you should grow it. It's high value. We'll buy it, and everything else. So they planted a whole field of tomatoes, right? And one night, the hippopotamus came up from the river, ate all the tomatoes, and they said, we told you so.
Well, that's a wonderful end to that story. Okay, a lucky hippo. But yes, now we will open to next questions. So we have 10 minutes. So for those with burning questions, we have a next person that would love to ask our panel a question or a reflection. I see someone with a beautiful batik in the back.
I think I just want to continue by I'm not going to tell you who I am, just you can ask me later, but just to be quick. I think I'd like to kind of approach this in a different way because I think that it's multidimensional issues, right? Pain point is one of them, but especially in Indonesia where you've got a lot of, even if the distance is short, but there's a lot of geographical and economic islands of these little villages, right? They don't have the infrastructure to go into the city. It's difficult to go there. They have to take a boat by half a day or something. And that creates its own issue, and it's a dimension that you can't, the pain point isn't necessarily that they want to go to go to the city. They just want to be where they're at and be self-sufficient, for example, right? So that's kind of another dimension into it. And then the other one is that social aspect of it. So one is the geographical, that the farther they are from the economic center, I think their aspirations is much less. It's much more simple, right? Which means the pain point that we think, oh, they just want money, they want economic success or growth, it's probably less of an issue. And then on top of that, there's a social aspect of what do they really want? They're happy to just be with everybody, right? Just hanging out. So I think I just want to add that we may need to look at this not just in what's your pain point from our biases, but also really from their own. And we've kind of experienced this by a lot of our team members have stayed in the villages to do a lot of our work. Not just a week or 2 weeks or a month. Some of them have stayed there for a year or two in the same village or the same community. And that, beyond 2 or 3 months, that gives you a lot of different perspectives. So I think I just want to add that to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So do our panelists have any replies to his? But it's a beautiful reflection. Thank you for sharing that story with us. Anyway, Dr. Naweed, would you like to?
I think one way we are addressing that issue, like I said, we keep the smallholders as the center of our focus, is to work with farm cooperatives in the region. And we have seen that differing with every geography that we have worked with, Laos, Indonesia, and India. There are hyper-localized problems associated with each of these geographies. I think our package of practices, which I alluded to, this three-pronged approach, takes care of it in some way, which is to provide them with a solution that is more localized in its impact. So that in some cases, we know where the gap is. So if you need to set up, for example, just a simple aspect of checking whether the local varieties would adapt to these climate smart agriculture practices is the first point. And what also helps is that once you build that local institution or cooperative angle to it, then the community already comes together so that they could collectively address the issues within that without moving out to an economic center as you referred to.
Thank you, Dr. Naweed. I think I see the next questions in the back.
Yes, thank you very much, Robin. And good morning, everyone. My name is Jakshai Shomtongdi. I'm the Southeast Asia Director of Till Collective. It's a new philanthropies working in promoting, transforming food system, hopefully, towards a healthy and sustainable consumption. Thank you. It's a very rich discussion this morning already, but one of the points I would like to maybe want to hear as well is the issues related to well, 2/3 of the emission from the agriculture system, and that is linked to livestock. And in Asia is also an emerging, increasing, and rapidly trend in both consumption and production in terms of our protein source as well. In your view, how do you see the growth of plant-based and sustainable protein sources, which is associated with, as I mentioned, around 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emission from the food sector, could be considered as key component of climate change mitigation solution? And because it's just we have a huge biodiversity here in the region, and that could be also the issues that could be considered as livelihood opportunities for farmers, as well as guarantees protein securities for students, schools, and increasing population in this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now, anyone would like to take on his question or slight reflection?
So I'm not an expert on plant food, but I frequently give talks to students. And when they ask, what can we do to help, in climate change, I always tell them first, try to take more public transport because that's something you can do. Switch off your air condition as much as you can. And lastly, eat more vegetables because obviously meat is a greenhouse gas emitter. I understand the transition that it's very difficult for people to give up meat. So plant-based food obviously is one avenue, but the best avenue is just give it up. In my company, we actually have a habit. We try to encourage people to take public transport at least one day a week and to try to go vegetarian one day a week. I urge all of you to try that as well.
Thank you so much. And I also have beside him the next question.
Hi, I'm Shirley Liu from ProVac International. We're focusing on advancing the innovations of alternative proteins. And my question is, how can the narratives of climate-resistant agriculture include the narratives about demand for climate-friendly food or choice of diets? Second question is, very impressive to see the examples that the moderator just showed, school education. How can we implement broad-based school education so to make our kids have the awareness about the choice of food, broader impact in environment, in their health, and also in society? Thank you.
I think, Dr. Dani, for the school question, I think you can answer this with the lighthouse schools you have in different countries. So,
that's a very good question. And how do you, in our case, working with kids in terms of behavioral change around more planet-friendly school menus and meals, so working with canteen staff, students, and teachers and parents. We've been doing quite a bit around that. I also think in terms of, moving towards more plant-based foods, overcoming there's a lot of taboos, there's a lot of attitudes towards a lot of locally available food biodiversity, including vegetables and fruits. And I'd also mention including fruits in school meals as well, and fruit trees. So in places like Kenya, where we've worked in trying to link a significant amount of African leafy vegetables, and there's about 15 different species that we work with. So we were faced with a lot of attitudes towards introducing those into school meals that sort of ranged from kids, and this was a boarding school, they'll refuse to eat what's served up because they were perceived as foods of the poor, backward, and so forth, to other problems that the headmasters were worried about, that they would go on strike and they would burn down the dormitories and things like this at schools. So I won't get into it, but there are ways that you can go about in terms of addressing those constraints and challenges around kids' behavior. And a lot of work that you can do around school food environments more broadly. So just to go back to the Philippines example, where we've actually got some of those lighthouse schools, with that integrated school nutrition model. You know, you walk out of some of those schools or after the holidays when the kids are coming back, and on either side of the entry, you've got the likes of Pizza Hut and KFC advertising, welcoming back the students. Yeah, so no, they're seeing that before they get exposed to that.
With McDonald's right beside them too.
Jollibee
And
everything.
Jollibee.
Yeah.
I'm Filipino, so I'm kind of biased
Yeah,
on that one. Okay, but thank you so much. Do you have anything
And maybe
else?
just not to forget in terms of animal-based foods, because they are important. And again, it's context specific, yeah. And there's a huge amount. We work with our sister organization, World Fish, in terms of indigenous fish and integrated rice systems. So no, there are a lot of options out there to address the issue as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dan. And thank you to everyone for participating so much for this open panel discussion. I want to thank you all as a panelist for sharing. I think we realize here that a solution isn't just one solution fits all. It really does come to respecting cultures, geographies of a place. And through all your different works and different backgrounds, you're doing such great impact. So thank you so much, and kindly all give them a big round of applause as they exit the floor.